live on YouTube real quick.
Okay.
Good deal.
And start our recording. Okay, great, everyone. We're live on YouTube and recording this meeting on Zoom as well with some attendees listening into our webinar. So I'll call our roll real quick. If you can just unmute and verbally confirm if you're here. Lozel Daniel.
Here.
Dr. Eric Calvoda.
Here.
Vivian Johnson.
Here.
Dr. Bethany Fish. Dr. Vijay Gopi. Dr. V, can you unmute?
He's here.
Okay.
I can see him there.
Yeah.
Chet Chasson. Scott Gimmel.
Here.
Wild Guilfoyle.
Here.
Kent Rogers.
Here.
Danira Washington.
Present.
Jessica Kemp.
Here.
Ann Vale.
Here.
Joe Anati. Alex Pazorski.
Here.
And Harriet Trigoni. There we go.
Great.
Chairs, we do have a quorum of our members.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Lindsay. We'll get the meeting started. The first thing on the agenda is approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve? I see a motion by Ann Vale to approve. Is there a second?
I'll
second.
second.
Looks like who seconded it? It was hard to tell.
Eric, I think.
Was it? Okay, great. Are there any amendments or concerns about the minutes? Any discussion? No. All in favor of approval of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Your hand. Are there any opposed or abstentions? I'm hearing none. The minutes are approved. Thanks so much, everyone. Lindsay, we're going to turn this over to you to discuss the action development process.
Great, members, I'm going to share my screen and walk us through just a brief presentation to kick off the discussion today. As both of the chairs mentioned, we really want this meeting today to be a working session to start developing out our sector-related strategies and actions. We want to create the space for you all to discuss with one another what these strategies and actions look like. So this is exciting. This is, I know, a point that everyone has been long awaiting. But before we jump in, I just wanted to set some desired outcomes of what we want to walk away from this meeting with. So we want to start with developing those overarching strategies and then develop some actions that go within those strategies. So that's where we'll dive into the details of the policies and programs and specific solutions to where we can meet our emission reduction targets through this transportation sector. Then once we've identified a full list of actions within those strategies, we'll then assign out a point person to develop a proposal for each. We might not get through the full list. I know there's a lot of actions in transportation. And so I'll follow up with you all over email with a spreadsheet that kind of outlines the homework that we'll walk away from today with. And then lastly, I'll just note at the end where we're going next. We're going into this April cross-sector workshop and these few workshops. And I'll just tee up what that looks like right before we adjourn at the end. And I'll reiterate this a few times in our meeting today, but the goal at this stage really is brainstorming and broad thinking. We can analyze and combine and really track things as we move forward, but today we just want to generate ideas, throw everything against the wall, see what sticks. And so as we move throughout this meeting and we go into these working sessions, I'll be facilitating with leadership from the chairs, and then Colleen McHugh from the Water Institute is also on this call. And she'll be live note taking so we can track what we've talked about, who's been assigned what, as we move forward in that second working session when we dive into actions. But before we jump into the working sessions, just wanted to walk through some questions that Colleen and I have received since both of us walked through the action development process in the April all hands meeting. So So we laid out where we're going and the purpose of this action process. We've received some really great questions from chairs and members and also people in the public around this process. So I just wanted to answer some of these questions that you all might have as well. And this is around the process of submitting actions, what happens once a proposal is submitted, how are they then evaluated and weighed, do we want collaboration, can people collaborate together, and then how are public submittals incorporated into this process. So just to kick us off, the process of submitting actions is the same for everyone. Everyone, whether public or members, has this April 30th deadline of submitting the actions in the action template. But for you all as members of the sector committee, I just want to show your the next few months of work that you'll be doing. So in this March meeting, it'll be our working session to brainstorm these strategies and actions with the goal of identifying actions and assigning out members to draft them. In April, before that deadline, we'll have some cross-sector review working sessions to provide that cross-disciplinary feedback on certain actions that might be needed. So the goal then is to really refine through multiple lenses, some specific actions. And then in May, once everything has been submitted, you guys will come back together to discuss sector action proposals that were submitted by members of the committee, but also by members of the public that are relevant to transportation. So the goal there will be to identify gaps, maybe highlight some approaches, try to begin to put together a comprehensive bucket of actions within this committee. And just to hone in on the role of the committees in the larger process, your work is concentrated over the next few months. So I just want to say, I know this is a heavy lift for you all over the coming months to work outside of meetings, to really collaborate and build out these actions. But this is where your work will be highlighted in this process. So we'll keep you guys in the loop and keep you engaged as we move throughout the year. But the role of the committees is really in developing the details of actions that support our strategies. So you can expect a lighter load as we move into the second half of the year, because that's when the task force will start to make decisions and really work through the actions in developing our plan moving forward. So another great question that we've received is around what happens to my proposal once it's submitted. And there are a lot of steps, as you can tell on this slide, of what happens to a proposal. So I'll run through this quickly, but wanted to show you from beginning to end where these actions will go. So after action proposals are submitted, we are planning to provide regular updates to the climate website and also to all of our members via email on what proposals have been received. So I'll probably send out our first one of those either later today or Monday morning around what proposals we've received already, but want to provide those regular updates for everyone so you can see what proposals have been received, who has worked on what, and people will see their proposals in their raw form that are on the website. And then, as I mentioned in May, once we have all the proposals together, we'll sort them into sectors, and then you guys will come back together and discuss the proposals relevant to the transportation sector. And then in late May or early June, we'll report out to the task force on all of the actions that have been received. And then from there, go into a process of organizing, combining, splitting, trying to gap fill and group our actions into strategies to create that interconnected nature of all of the work across the different committees. So we're ensuring there's coordination among them. And then we'll organize actions and strategies into their hypothetical portfolios. So then beginning to start organizing these actions. And as I mentioned before, the role of our advisory groups is in evaluation. So then we'll have these portfolios evaluated against our fundamental objectives. And then you all will have the chance to come back in August to revise your actions based on feedback from advisory groups. So having that chance to come back, I think in late August is when you guys will reconvene for that. And then the task force will take these finalized actions and strategies and run a trade-off analysis to really understand the trade-off among different strategies and different paths forward. And then they'll make a decision on that final action portfolio that will go into our final report next February. So I know that's a long process, but wanted you all to be aware of where actions do go in the future. And I would just say this process is the same for a committee member action as it is for a public action. So an action is really an action. So when you submit an action, you all are also submitting as a member of the public. Our committee actions don't have any special preference. And this is really just a way to remove bias and ensure that we're considering all ideas. So another great question that we've been asked is around, is my action one template or is it multiple templates? And that depends on a series of related policies or tactics. How should they be submitted? So since actions are directly implementable, a good rule of thumb is to look at the implementation pathways to see if they're significantly similar or different. So just as a reminder, in the action template, we want you to identify to the best that you can an implementation pathway for that action, which looks like what is the time frame for implementation, who leads action development, who needs to partner, what is the process for adopting and implementing this action and funding it. So if you find that across a few different action ideas you have, they look similar, then you could consider submitting maybe as one proposed program with multiple tactics within or multiple policies within that. But if you think that there are some different ways to implement this action, then you can absolutely submit a separate action proposals for each. And I would just say that this is not a big concern for our discussion today. We want to focus on idea generation, but I just wanted to flag this for you all as you move forward. And I'm happy to help you all think through this more, answer questions as you start developing out the template on whether it's one or multiple actions. The last thing that I would like to address is on collaboration. So collaboration is very much encouraged on action proposals where multiple groups are considering common or similar approaches or actions. To the extent that you all can agree on a unified implementation pathway, then we certainly encourage organizing around action ideas, which could look like maybe 2 members from a sector committee working together on an action, or committee members, 1 or 2 committee members working with 1 or 2 members of a different committee on some of those cross-sector actions. Committee members can also work with local organizations. We understand that some actions you might not be able to answer on your own, but you might know someone who can fill out the action adequately or who knows the answers. And we also encourage multiple members of the public to work together on proposals. But I would say if members can't agree on an approach, or you maybe think that multiple approaches should be considered, then that's quite all right. We'll sort that out later in the trade-off analysis when we evaluate. So this really allows us to consider a broad range of ideas, wanting to get everything out there, understanding that on some different actions, multiple ways of reaching it might need to be considered. And since we are evaluating against our fundamental objectives, just wanted to clarify that several actions submitted or several proposals submitted for the same action won't automatically score higher. So this is intended to remove bias against popularity of proposals, or as I mentioned, between a public and a committee proposal. We want to evaluate against those fundamental objectives that the task force has expressed. And you all spent a lot of time in that first meeting helping the task force build what really are our fundamental objectives. And that's how we'll evaluate our actions and strategies moving forward. But with that, I would say it is a good sign of having multiple names and organizations as co-developers on an action proposal. It's a good way to show broad support and organized input on actions. So with that, I'll take any questions that you all might have on the action process. And again, just reiterate that I'm more than glad to answer any more questions on process as you move forward.
Any questions from committee members?
No, just a comment that we've already been pushing it out to some of our stakeholders, and we'll be continuing to promote it to the alternative fuel industry to get some expert advice and suggestions from as many of them as possible.
And that's great.
Thanks, Anne.
And members, I would just note one more thing. I know that the template is very complex and it's 25 or 26 questions. So we know that not in all cases you'll be able to answer every question. We don't really expect that, especially on some of the quantitative analysis they're providing, economic data or greenhouse gas reduction potential. Those are more to frame the types of questions that we'll be looking for and evaluating against, understanding that you all might not have access to that data. We might not have access to that data, but those are important considerations.
Lindsay, can you go back? Thank you for that. Can you go back to the slide about collaborating on action proposals? I just want to highlight something there. So, because we've gotten quite a few questions about how to do that. And so I really appreciate it. I wanted to make sure the committee members had a chance to understand what was being recommended here. And also, I guess, to understand, Lindsay, for people who feel like we do have to collaborate across different committees. Like I know, for instance, that we have a lot of interest in collaborating with the land use committee, for instance. Is there staff support for that, or is that something that we should consider doing in the context of our committee work and then come back to the staff with whatever those recommendations or actions are?
That's a great question, Flozell, particularly for you all working with land use. So what I've been doing for our committees afterwards is, once we run through our actions and our strategies, I'll put together a spreadsheet of what strategies are identified and the actions within them and who's leading them.
Mm-hmm.
And put you all with since you all are our last sector committee to meet, I'll put you all with a lead identified on a similar action from another committee. So we'll have a category for cross sector, and then who's the lead on that committee in that particular action, and then connect you guys to work on together.
Great. Okay. That sounds good to me.
Okay, good.
Thank you. So if there aren't any other questions or points of input, looks like we should move on to the sector strategies. Let me ask a question. Typically, we have a sort of rolling rule for folk to take breaks when they need to. Do we need to coordinate a place where we take a break in this agenda since it's so long so that we can be more strategic? I'd rather not have folks going in and out while we're doing the strategy work if possible. So maybe we need to coordinate taking a break somewhere halfway in between or something like that. I'm not sure what you've seen, Lindsay, in the other meetings.
We could absolutely take a break. I would also say we could do the rolling time as well, but wouldn't want people to miss discussion. How about we get through this first working session on strategy, on overarching strategy, and then before we get into that 60-minute working session on actions, we could take like a 3 or 5 minute break.
That works for me. Eric, is that okay? Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's fine. I'd like to hear what everybody has to say, their ideas, and just go
Right.
around through the whole group. And
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, great. Thanks,
Yeah.
Lindsay.
No problem. So now we're moving into this first working session on strategies. And just to frame a few desired outcomes of this working session, we want to develop a draft list of the sector-related strategies that are relevant for transportation and some of the cross-cutting lenses. And just a reminder, strategies are the high-level path to reduce emissions. So after this, we don't want to spend too much time on the strategies so that we can, in our next working session, dive into those deeper actions. But these are just the overarching categories that we want to put the actions within, just a way to get them organized. And so with that, I'd say that we've developed a starting menu of potential strategies, really based on the conversation you all had in your first meeting on means objectives in that objective discussion that we had. I've also incorporated some of the work that the U.S. Climate Alliance had in their best practices back in that February all-hands meeting, and some desktop literature of other state climate action plans as well. So these can be added or modified, and I guarantee as the process goes on, they'll probably be modified even more. So it's okay if these, even as you see them today, can be tweaked more, because I'm sure they'll change with time. But again, our goal is brainstorming, broad thinking. We want to think, especially with these strategies, how do we frame these high-level paths to set us on a future for Louisiana to be net zero? And then I'll also walk through a few strategies that apply across sectors. So just some ground rules on discussion, again, brainstorming, thinking about success in Louisiana, capturing some big concepts and strategies. Colleen and I will be note-taking and capturing your ideas. So understanding that we can refine and reword things later. And if you're not sure if something's an action or a strategy, that's also quite all right. We can work through that some later as well. So I'll run through our list of strategies real quick and then open it up to discussion. Our chairs can kick us off with that. But just to start with our strategies, I've kind of organized them into 4 different buckets. So thinking about public transit, passenger and light duty vehicle emission reduction, and then heavy duty vehicle emission reduction and freight transit. So within these, again, very high level strategies. There are a lot of actions that could be done with any strategy. But if we take public transit, a few strategies within that, we can encourage and support use of public transit, encourage and support bicycling, walking, and ride sharing for transit, and encourage alternative fuel use in public transit. If we look to passenger and light duty emission reduction, we can encourage and support transition to EVs, encourage transition to lower emission vehicles, support work from home, and trying to meet people's needs without transit. And if we turn to heavy duty vehicle emission reduction, transition to lower greenhouse gas emissions with commercial and industrial heavy duty vehicles, transition to lower GHG emission operations in vehicular freight transit. And then if we look at freight transit, not in that vehicular sense, we can transition to lower emissions in vessel operations, in rail operations, and then improve freight efficiency in that commercial and industrial lens. So we'll come right back to that, but I wanted to bring for you all some cross-cutting strategies with other sectors, since that is very important in this group. So with land use, some ideas of strategies here is reducing greenhouse gas emissions from all roadway vehicles, really through changes in the roadway. Another one is smart development, developing infrastructure that enables walking, biking, public transit, and carpool. And then efficiency in airport operations. I know that's something that Scott has mentioned to us before in the airport world that would be helpful. And then in power, thinking through that intersection of electrification, renewable energy and travel. In ag and forestry, reducing emission from farm equipment is an area that they've expressed interest in collaborating with you all. And just to frame some general non-sector strategies and themes, we want to keep these in mind as we go through developing all of our actions. So implications on the economy, economy-wide mechanisms, climate equity, economic transition, how do we engage and educate, R&D, and financial strategies. So with that, I'll come back to our strategy starting menu. I see we already have some hands raised. And we really want to think about, are these the right buckets? Are these the right overarching buckets to put our actions in?
Right.
So with that, I'll hand it over to our chairs to lead us through some discussion on that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lindsay. Before we get started, I see that Harriet has a question. Harriet, do you want to check in?
If I can you hear me?
Yeah, please. You sound good.
This is a question that might have already been covered in a previous meeting, but are we trying to recommend those things that get us as close as we think is feasible to our greenhouse gas reduction goals? Or are we trying to recommend things that that will absolutely achieve those goals, whether or not we have misgivings about how likely they are to be adopted?
That's a good question. Lindsay, do you want to start, and then Eric and I will weigh in?
Yeah, I'll start on that. So feasibility is very important for creating climate action in Louisiana, just more broadly, that we would have feasible strategies, but being able to think through what's feasible in the short term, and then understanding that we might need to work towards some more challenging methods of reducing emissions in the future. So we can start doing research on that now, or we can start expanding the market there now. Yes.
as part of, I sort of understand the question about technical feasibility,
Mhm.
right? So like whether we go for hydrogen versus battery electric, but there's other kinds of feasibility. Right now, more than half of all trips that are taken by automobile in the US are less than 1 mile.
Mhm.
So if all of those trips in Louisiana were taken by something other than a car, right now more than 60% of them are taken by automobile. If all those became taken walk, bike, or transit, that's feasible now in many places, but behaviorally, it's not how people have been traveling. So I think you've sort of answered my question, but I was just suggesting that not everything is technical feasibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've had some of those discussions, Harriet, as far as the behavioral elements and the things that we don't get to control. And I think, quite honestly, there are different opinions on the committee as far as the discussions I've had with members. Some of us thinking that we have to really nail the technical and the practical, because that's what we can measure and manage. But there's also a strong sense of aspirational, like what's the opportunity for us to shift and change culture? And we've seen in other spaces like public health, for instance, that there are significant opportunities to change culture and behavior. And I think that should be a part of this discussion and the ongoing analysis of the development of the strategies and actions and ultimate recommendations.
And I guess that the co-benefits of those changes would also end up weighing heavily in terms of whether you pursue something that doesn't seem behaviorally feasible, let's say, if it has a lot of these other co-benefits.
Yeah, and there's some trigger points or milestones in the strategic decision-making process that allow us to interrogate those things and to push back on each other and debate a bit the feasibility pieces. Thanks, Harriet.
Thank you.
Anne, you, and after you, Jessica.
Awesome. Two things. Where would idle reduction fit into here? Because that is a reduction of fuel being used, where public transit would help do that. Almost every one of these sectors can greatly benefit from idle reduction, shore power, truck stop electrification, where we prevent someone from burning fuel that they don't need to burn.
Yeah, I think, as Lindsay indicated, there'll be instances where something fits in multiple spaces. And so I think as we have this conversation, if you all would indicate, especially inside of your areas of expertise, where you believe there are cross-cutting strategies that should be applied across multiple.
Okay. And the second one, in the term of feasibility and technology, this is kind of a long-term goal for us too. We have things that we're going to want to do immediately, and there's things that we're going to be doing as the technologies mature and as our infrastructure is built out and we're capable of handling more of a mass conversion. So I definitely want to recommend that the committee thinks of things as, what can we do now with the technology that we have right now? Things that are affordable, economic, make sense, big bang for your buck. Get them done now and continue doing them into the future while we work towards preparing for medium and heavy duty electric vehicles. And after that, hydrogen fuel cell for heavy duty and so forth. Because there's some things that quite aren't mature just yet, but they're beginning to happen right now. And we can start the preparation and the groundwork for it so that we're ready when those vehicles are mature and ready.
Right. And the action template you'll see has short-term, midterm, and long-term timeframes. And so maybe as we have this discussion, we can start to imagine, what does that 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and then 10 plus years look like? So maybe we can tag those inside of this strategy discussion and actions and start to put those in the appropriate sequence. Thanks, Anne. Jessica.
Thanks, Fozell. Just briefly, I want to return to Harriet's question, because I think everybody was being very diplomatic, but I want to be very straightforward in sharing my feeling that we would be doing the state a disservice to be limited by questions of feasibility. And I hope that we would focus on what is needed to reach these goals, and then understand what are what are what are those barriers, whether they be financial, behavioral, cultural, so that because we have, in order to reach these goals, behavioral changes are going to have to take place. Perceptions are going to have to shift. I mean, we don't reach this goal without that happening. So by just acknowledging that that's part of it, then we can get to action items that, allow us to work in. What are the communication strategies or campaigns that need to go along with some of these things to lower those barriers? So I just wanted to share that.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm going to really look to the committee as we have this discussion to weigh in on where are they. I certainly agree with you. I think everything has to be bold. This is sort of man to the moon stuff that we're doing here, right? And so we're going to have to think along those lines. Thank you, Jessica. Alex Pazorski?
Yeah, not to beat a dead horse, but just really want to agree with Jessica and what you just said, Chair Daniels, that I really hope we aren't beholden to individual ideas of, well, that might not be possible or might not be feasible, especially when it comes to certain preconceptions about behavior, and especially as we're looking over a multi-year, multi-decade period for this. So just want to really echo what everybody said and underline it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alex, for that. I think there's lots of agreement on that front, and where there isn't, we'll manage it. The scientist in me believes in shifting behavior and culture, because that's a part of how we get there. But we also, I think, are going to have some serious work ahead of us in thinking about what are those strategies and how do we actually achieve those. And I think everyone is up for that task. So if there aren't any other questions or points, why don't we jump right in? Lindsay, can you remind us, as folks offer their ideas about strategies, someone's taking notes, or are you doing that in real time, or what's been the practice so far?
So in this working session, we'll keep this slide up just so we can look at the strategies overarching to make sure that we're taking those broad strokes, these big buckets, cover everything in this sector. But then as we move into the next working session, then Colleen will share her screen and we'll live take notes.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. All right, good
Michelle,
people.
Excuse me.
Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out before we go member by member, there's one huge bucket that's missing on here, and that's the sequestration. There's natural sequestration and there's carbon capture, and that is a potential strategy for transportation as well as some of the other sectors. But so that's an option for us, is sequestration. So I don't want to limit everybody's thinking to the 4 that are on the screen here.
Okay.
Not including that other bucket of sequestration.
And Eric, if are you in a position to answer any questions about that, or and maybe other committee members can? It's not something I'm well versed on, and so
yes,
and the role it plays in transportation.
Yeah, we've asked a scientific group about some data on the uptake of carbon and for different types of trees and things like that, and reforestation efforts and such. So, yes.
All right, sounds good. So why don't we get started? The first one, we'll just go with the menu that's here. And so we'll go in order. We had the advantage of Eric and I, with our teams, were able to send out some thoughts and to get some thoughts from committee members in advance so we can really jump in. And some of you have already submitted some thoughts about public transit. So why don't we jump in with those, and anyone else with thoughts at the strategy level, if there's something that's missing here. It looks like Alex has his hand up. Alex Pazorski.
Yeah, I mean, I like this strategy overall. I think that's a good bucket of things there. I'm very curious to get into some of the actions. Obviously, the only thing I would note on this, and it might be a slight just word quibble, but I would highlight support over encourage, I think, in terms of what the state is able to do and what we should be tasked with here. I think what's needed is a lot more emphasis on how we can support it. I would say a lot of the encouragement comes just from the support, though I recognize from some of our previous conversations, there's thoughts that we need to have that encourage in there as well, but I would suggest switching those wording, the order of the words around there.
Sure. And just by way of clarification, what I'm hearing you say, Alex, is encourage is great, but support implies something else, particularly financial support and budgets and things of that nature.
As always, more articulately than I said it, but yes, thank you.
Well, I think it's important to just say out loud, because then when we get to the question that Harriet and others asked, we can really interrogate those things. Thank you for that. Anybody else on public transit?
Sure, Daniel, this is Daryl Washington.
Hey there, Mr. Washington.
I totally agree with this list. I agree wholeheartedly with Alex. I think support is what's missing. And I think this is doable for public transit, speaking from the public transit provider point of view. So I think this is doable.
Fantastic.
I'm sorry, De Niro, could you repeat that? Your mic wasn't turned up very loud and I couldn't hear you. And by the time I turned it up, you'd already finished.
I'm sorry, and let me speak up a little bit louder. I said that I think this is a very doable situation. I think support is definitely supported from the state versus encourage. A lot of times people take encourage and don't really move on anything. They just feel like it's a non-actionable word, but they feel like they have the support from the state in order to do something. I wholeheartedly agree with Alex. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, excellent. Jessica, and then after Jessica, Vivian.
Thanks. I'm going to struggle throughout between strategies and actions, but just one thing that comes to mind for transit is some places are doing this better than others, but to really emphasize coordinating planning for transit and housing.
Yeah. And so, Jessica, do you think that can fit as an action under encourage and support use of public transit, or does it deserve a separate strategy statement? And remember, we don't have to be perfect with this. We can just.
Yeah, I don't. So of course I'm coming from a planning perspective. So I have a lot of, it's hard to tell chicken or egg. Like I feel like, I don't know if planning is the support to these strategies, because I think planning plays a role in a number of these, or what. And it doesn't matter to me. I just think it's important that it shows up somewhere.
All right, let's acknowledge that input. I actually think it is a strategy for public transit writ large. I have a bit of a bias, and De Niro probably does also, around the connection between actually implementing public transit strategies and coordinating from a land use and sort of TOD perspective writ large. And so that's something we can flesh out a bit. Vivian, and then I'll come back to Ann.
Thank you. And to just maybe say a bit more is a big part in public transportation because of spread, especially, take for instance, the Baton Rouge area. We spread out. We don't stay in one area. We don't reuse properties. So I think the planning aspect in that is very important. The part I wanted to touch on in public transport is the intercity public transport. I want to go back to Hurricane Katrina. It's not something we all like to visit, but it did have some things that came out of it that were good. And LA Swift was one of them. I think that either bus or rail transportation between cities is going to be imperative if we are going to look at the reduction of the greenhouse emissions in vehicles.
Great.
I mean, in the old days, Florida Boulevard was built so that you could have transport in the middle.
Yeah.
Now it's just a median.
Great. Thank you for that, Vivian. I think when we'll be able to get to some of that when we get to some of the cross-sector stuff. You guys are bringing up a lot of good stuff. Ann.
Also in the same vein as planning, because of course none of this can happen without proper plans and strategic thinking, is education and outreach. If we're going to change hearts and minds, or we're going to encourage fleets or individuals to change what they're doing, where does outreach and education fit into this? We're going to have to be able to help a fleet understand what they're going to be getting into if they're going to convert their fleet to electric. We've got to educate the utilities so they understand, we're already doing some of that, but this needs to really be ramped up. So where do we put that in the bucket?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Let's see here. So Anne and Vivian have spoken already. Any other points on public transit before we move through? I'm sensitive to the time. I want to make sure we get as much done as possible. It looks like, oh, Scott, there you go. Hey there.
Hey, good afternoon. Under public transit, of course, we absolutely are encouraging sustainable fuels as sustainable aviation fuel. So that goes without saying. But I do have a question as far as under the public transport in our transportation. Aviation, we also run the terminals. That's buildings, and does transportation cross over to airports? Not or does airports fall in a different committee? And get to my point is that here at Alexandria, we are pushing hard, working with CLECO to do solar farms, because airports, we have a lot of land use restrictions.
Yeah.
And solar falls right in to a good land use because of the height, the different regulations we have to abide by. And so would that fall under this committee, or does aviation / airports also cross over to another committee to talk about solar usage?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Scott. I think if I'm listening to Lindsay, I think what we do here is be as open as possible in putting the strategies forth.
Okay.
I personally think from my professional lens, I think it fits squarely inside of the GHG emissions conversation and the sustainability conversation about what it means to make public transit sustainable and successful. And I always include airports as a part of that, but others may disagree.
Okay, because many airports, in the United States right now are incorporating, the solar farms in development of their long-term plans, and just like here in Alexandria, and can be used to support airport operations and reduce carbon emissions drastically. So that is one of the strategies that here that I would suggest, but we're actually presently doing.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't show up on in the strategy section for some of the other committees.
I'm sure it will.
Yeah.
If I can interject just briefly, we want that as part of our credit in this committee.
Okay.
The objectives are the objectives, and we're not going to try to offset somebody else's GHG stuff.
That's right.
They shouldn't be taking ours either. So that gains we can make from that. And I think Scott's idea is excellent, because we do have a lot of land around airports. You're not allowed, because of height restrictions, you're not allowed to use it for anything.
That's correct.
For solar farms. And then if we can do that, then we can capture that and use that as part of our credits.
Yeah, I think it's huge. And let the record reflect, Dr. Calavoda has said we are taking all of our credits for the Transportation Committee.
And Scott, I think that's a great idea. I noted on the next slide in cross-cutting strategies, I remember last time you mentioned there could be some efficiency in airport operations. So I had already put that under the land use committee. This would be a great other point of connection with the land use committee and airports.
Fantastic. All right, I want to move on to passenger and LDV emission reduction. Lindsay, as we're going through this, it does occur to me, and I think you guys saw this in other committees, we may take more time on the strategies section than the 20 minutes. I just don't know how we'll get through it in 20 minutes. And I want to flag that just in case there's any concern about that.
Yeah, that's quite all right if we take a little longer here.
Okay.
And then in the actions, we'll take a deep dive. Colleen will edit the strategies as we talk through them too.
Great.
And so when she shares screens, it will show the updated version.
We can rely on our fellow committee members to be concise and get right to the point. And we also want to remind people, if there's a strategy that doesn't fit into any of these, if you could start to prepare your thoughts and recommendations about what we might add to this if you feel like something's missing. I want to make sure, Vivian, did you have another hand up, or is that from the old, from the last comment? Okay, yeah, from the last comment. All right, good people. Passenger and LDV emission reduction. You see a few points here by way of supporting transition to electric vehicles, transition to lower emission vehicles, and support work from home, and meeting needs without transit, which kind of goes to the heart of what some of you were mentioning earlier. Alex Pozorski, you want to jump in here?
Yeah. Again, maybe just word quibbles here, but I'm trying to remember why we say specifically without transit there. Having in a decade of activism now on this, heard multiple reasons for why transit isn't an investment priority, including things like, well, everybody's going to work from home now. I'm sensitive when I see language like that.
Mm-hmm. Is it, when I read it, Alex, I wondered if it didn't include, you know, I certainly think there's a lot of discussion about rural communities and other communities that are fairly well disconnected. And also in the context of this pandemic, wondering if there are ways to support these other strategies. What's your concern is that we are somehow potentially encouraging the use of passenger vehicles, or what's the?
Encouraging a narrative that transit is not a solution. I mean, I think saying just support work from home and any potential infrastructure or policies you would need for that would be good enough for me and would cover that.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. And Harriet, yeah, I think it does mean transportation in this context. Okay, great. Thank you, Alex. We will note that specifically and come back through it. On my screen, I see Jessica. And then after Jessica, Vivian.
Okay.
Oh, not Vivian, okay.
It would make sense to me to add reduce VMTs under this strategy.
Mm-hmm. Reduce what now?
VMTs, vehicle miles traveled.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Harriet.
Thank you. This again might be covered somewhere else, and this last bullet under passenger, et cetera, emission reduction. It's not all just work from home. Lots of parts of Louisiana are rural or remote. Maybe what we want is a strategy that allows people to access their needs, whether that's school, whether that's work, whether that's telemedicine, without having to necessarily go into a large population center to do it. So that might mean a broadband strategy. It might mean centers in Louisiana that also might be associated with emergency shelters and other purposes, and maybe use some of that emergency, that disaster recovery money to fund it, but to also put in broadband so that when people, even if they should have to travel, they have to travel like 15 or 20 miles and not 100 miles to get to where they can have that kind of access.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And Eric and I were talking before about the infrastructure conversation. And so Lindsay, I see a bit of an infrastructure theme showing up here. Broadband. I didn't make the case, but I would like to make the point back in public transit actually about, in addition to alternative fuel use, electrification. I think Ann made the point earlier that it may not be something we can do tomorrow, but it's something we should look at. That's going to have significant infrastructure implications that we'll need investment in infrastructure to support and make that happen. I'm going to go to Dr. Gopu and then to Kent.
Well, thank you. I just want to comment on one thing. In the transition to electric vehicles, is that via tax credits or something that the state would plan to offer to encourage people to make the transition? That's one question. And that's one issue that needs to be addressed, because we just simply cannot say that we will support transition without actually putting money into that effort. And two, the transition is fine, but there are some other challenges. If everybody moves to electric vehicles, where are the charging stations? Yeah. Where is the state investing in the charging station? Unless these charging stations are ubiquitous, people are not going to be able to move to these EVs.
Right.
That's a huge challenge,
Yeah.
and that can be addressed in a smaller country, you know, like in Scandinavian countries. It's a lot easier. For us, it's much more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when there's a power shutdown? How are you going to charge these, these cars? How are you going to leave?
Yeah.
So there are lots of issues on transition to electric vehicles, which have to be addressed. Otherwise, I would like to buy a Tesla, but I cannot go more than 250 miles on a good day. And if it's a cold weather, the efficiency drops by 70%.
Yeah.
Tesla would go only 70 miles.
Yeah.
So I cannot even drive to New Orleans in that vehicle. So
Yeah.
I think there are lots of issues on this transition to electric vehicles, which people appear to be missing because it's a ability to access a charging station. And
well,
go ahead.
I think you bring up an excellent point, Dr. Goop. I think there are a couple of things. One is my understanding is in any of these recommendations, all of them are going to cost money and investment. And so there are just a bunch of questions, but I think there are also a bunch of answers about how we get that significant infrastructure investment to support what it would mean to make some transition. One of the things we heard earlier was that 50% of the personal vehicle trips in Louisiana, or someone mentioned maybe it's in the country, or a mile or less. And so I'm seeing a lot of people make the transition because they don't travel that far. And I see Ann has in a comment here that she's actually getting to travel across the state because the vehicles are now getting a lot more distance, up to 350 miles. And so I think we can cross that bridge. And it's the same thing with the charging stations and the significant level of infrastructure necessary. I think the assumption is that we'll be seeking support for those kinds of things. Thank you.
Well, Bill, if I may add,
yeah.
Dr. Lee, those are great action items that we can discuss in our next working session underneath how do we actually support that transition to electric vehicles. So that will require a lot of different actions to get there. And just a reminder, this is the brainstorming phase where we can really get everything out there, all of our ideas, even those that might not be.
Thanks for the distinction between strategy and action there too. Yeah. Let's go to Kent.
To go along with the comment in terms of the charging stations, I think when you feed into the heavy duty vehicles and the freight vehicles, it also goes to the other alternative fuels that are out there. And I think the biggest need is to encourage and support the private sector to put some of those fueling stations out there. Until you have, the Circle K's pumping, G and everything else out there, government shouldn't have to put in every single one of these stations and every single fuel operation station out there.
Yeah.
Yes, they should encourage it. Yes, they should support it. But, the Circle K's and the Exxons and Pilot, those out there providing those other fuel services, those longer term efforts aren't going to materialize. Yeah. Second question is, where does, someone mentioned something in terms of broadband, where does broadband fit into the overall climate change initiative? Is it under transportation? Is there another infrastructure segment that would fall under? That really is a huge issue, especially in the more rural parts of the parishes.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Kent. I'll encourage other committee members who may have thoughts about that to answer that question. Also, because I feel like I'm talking too much. Does anyone else have thoughts about Kent's question?
This is Eric. I think it does fall into transportation, Kent, because the main, it has economic benefits too that are really not associated with climate change, but the impact really from a climate change standpoint, I think is largely in transportation, because you have telework, you have remote learning, you have telemedicine, you have a number of things that people can do that don't require them either to leave their home or to go only a short distance, as somebody else spoke out before, rather than say travel 100 miles. And so a lot of its benefits, it allows home shopping and home delivery, which is a lot more efficient than having, 100 people go to a store to buy something. The store delivers to the 100 people. So I think it really, the lion's share of its benefits are with transportation.
Mhm.
Well,
from a greenhouse gas perspective, that is, yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
that and the self-driving vehicle somewhere down the line, because if the internet connectivity is not out there for them to utilize,
Mhm.
yeah, that'll never materialize either.
Thanks for that, Kent. Anne.
Yes, to echo what I believe it was, I don't see who it was now who was saying that, but we were talking about infrastructure and getting the public sector to jump in and to build. There are some issues and some barriers with just expecting them with natural gas, because there's not enough fleets out there using natural gas public fueling. Most of the natural gas fleets are doing behind the fence, using their own fueling and doing return to base. It's much more effective, cost effective to have your own slow fill station, fuel up at night, than to rely on the public. And the fast fills are really, really expensive. So there's a lot of things that we can do with public and private. I think Eric and I were talking about state fleet. If enough state fleet vehicles, say, are going to move to natural gas, they can make a public-private partnership with the public fueling stations, guarantee the gallons, then someone else will build the station. If you can guarantee the fuel use, people will go out, the public sector will build those fueling stations. And just as a very quick point, we are doing a lot of things with electric vehicle infrastructure that I'd love to update you all on, so you can get an idea of what we have and what's coming.
Fantastic. And as Lindsay said, some of those things I think will also come up in the action. So thanks for that, Anne. We're going to move to heavy duty vehicle emission reduction as we make that transition, and you all raise your hands to let me know if you want to check in on this one. What we also see in the chat that some of you can't see is a great discussion by Harriet about making sure that we're drawing the thread of disaster resilience and recovery throughout these strategies, and thinking about what are the implications for a state like Louisiana, who is permanently positioned to have to consider disaster resilience in all of our work. So Harriet, thanks for that.
Can I say something more about it very quickly? Just when we're talking about heavy duty vehicles,
yeah,
they have big batteries. If they're going to go to be electric, plug-in electric and battery operated, that means they're mobile energy sources that are excellent to deploy during a disaster. School buses are like a prime example. So I do think that you have a funding stream in Louisiana that others don't have, where you have a very legitimate disaster preparedness and recovery argument to make, to begin to electrify and to begin to pay for some of the infrastructure.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and also is, I think, deeply connected to the issue about the points about planning and what an important role planning can play. All right, good people, heavy duty vehicle emission reduction. Any other thoughts here?
I'll throw something out there, Flozell. Let's not just assume that the decision's been made that we should all go electric on everything. There are other alternative fuels too. There's biofuels that are made out of agricultural products or animal fats and things like that that are very effective in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I was reading a publication the other day from one of the trucking industry publication, and they indicated, at least right now with the state of technology where it is, to electrify a large truck that carries a large load, you give up 5 to 10% of your payload just in batteries. And that's a substantial amount. When you're talking about an 18-wheeler, for example, they carry about 50,000 pounds of cargo. If I got to get up 5,000 pounds of that just for the batteries, that's a significant inefficiency in that. Whereas if I could convert to, say, biodiesel, and I'm running off diesel made out of soybean oil, I don't have that problem. So
Yeah.
anyway, I just want to point out, let's not go down the electric path like whole hog, and let's not put all of our eggs in one basket. And we need to kind of diversify our fuel sources. That would be my suggestion.
Great. Thanks.
Eric,
Thanks.
oh, sorry, Jose. Eric, we can make that a cross-cutting strategy with agriculture, maybe focusing on biofuels.
Yeah, agriculture is a perfect example. I mean, farm equipment's in trucking for that's dirty stuff. I mean, the equipment gets extremely dirty, and you have to have mechanics that'll run through all of that, the muck, the dirt, and so you need reliability is a big issue too. Can't have sensitive equipment, that's for sure.
Great, thanks, Eric. I know one of the comments I've seen, there was a question about alternative fuels and what emissions, where are they showing up in the inventory? Not something for us to have to discuss here, but certainly something I think that'll be of interest to folks in the heavy duty conversation. Any other thoughts?
This is Vivian Johnson. I don't want you to think only agriculture with biofuels, because that's a misnomer. We live in South Louisiana. There's a lot of used oil out of a lot of restaurants that's being used to make biofuels right now. Mr. Calavoda has a very ingenious staff. I know several of his staff members that are driving vehicles now that are running diesel engines on biofuels. So, my husband has a setup at our house too. We take the used oil and we run our diesels on it. We run our tractor on it. We run our lawnmower on it. We run our 2 big diesel engines on it, our transportation. So it's not just in the bigger frame of ag, it's using what's already available, and anybody can collect that used oil. They put it out back and you go pick it up for free.
Great. And Vivi, do you feel like that's represented adequately here, or do you want to, because I don't know if it goes inside of the actions discussion, or are you comfortable that that's adequately represented here in the strategies?
As long as we use it in the non-EV for passenger, it can be for the passenger vehicles and for the heavy duty vehicles. Setting up a refining process is not difficult, and you use stuff that you already have on hand. So, I think we need to look at what we have available instead of going strictly to ag for biodiesel.
That makes sense. Thanks so much, Vivian.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we have 2 major biodiesel production facilities in the state of Louisiana, Renewable Energy Group and Diamond Green Diesel. They produce a lot of biodiesel, or renewable hydrocarbon diesel and such. So we have sources here in the state, and under the actions under policy, we need to find ways to maybe get a renewable fuel standard and such to get the prices down and to work with those industries, because right now they're selling most of it to California because they get more money by selling it to California than keeping it here in the state. But we have the production capability of fueling, school buses, 18-wheelers, anything that runs on diesel now. The fuel is here in Louisiana. It's just not being sold here in Louisiana.
Gotcha. Great. And as someone who's not a practitioner, I guess I'm just always trying to figure out, do we have an understanding of what the implications are from an emissions perspective? And I think we absolutely do.
Yeah,
so that's
have all that data.
Yeah, that's why I was just wondering. All right. And Vivian, did you have another point you wanted to make? No, are you good? Okay. Harriet has asked a question about medium duty vehicles missing. Let me ask Lindsay, do we know if are we including medium duty vehicles in freight transit, or are we?
I saw your question, Harriet. How about we create this category to say medium and heavy duty vehicle emission reduction? Okay. Would that encompass it well? Okay, great.
Yeah, I think, that's good. Yeah,
and we can add a strategy on here to address Vivian's comment of encouraging alternative fuel use.
Yeah, and that's important because at least the current inventory has medium duty vehicles as a pretty significant source of emissions. We won't know till the summer where the more recent inventory puts it, but Any other, I'm looking here, comments or thoughts about heavy duty before we move to freight transit? No? Okay, sounds good. Freight transit, transitioning to lower GHG emission vessel operations, rail operations, and improving efficiencies, both commercial and industrial, for freight transit. Harriet, do you have a thought?
I do. And that has to, I love the efficiency question. So one of the things, I'm also now on the board of ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. And I was shocked to see the enormous numbers associated with greater efficiency. There's something that I think they call cubing, that anyone who's gotten a delivery, during this pandemic knows that sometimes they get a huge box with almost nothing in it, but air. And that, that's a downside of e-commerce, that we're not necessarily ordering a box full of stuff. We're ordering one or two things at a time, perhaps. And it ends up being fairly inefficient. And there are lots of other sources of efficiency. So I just wanted to make sure that when we're talking about operations, that it includes real looks at the logistics side and management side of those freight operations that then tend to cut across medium and heavy duty vehicles as well as freight. And I could share some of the findings on that with from ACEEE with the task force.
Great, thanks, Harriet. Lindsay and Eric, it seems like there are a lot of recommendations and thoughts that maybe there's a way to cross-reference what will and won't be covered in the inventory, since we're going to be using the inventory as a means of understanding what the actual emissions impact of any of these recommendations are once we get on the other side of this. And so it seems like there are a few questions we can follow up later. Any other thoughts on the freight transit? Any other thoughts about the strategies at this level before we move to the next section? Anything missing? Are there any questions you want to pose that feel urgent and important?
Just another quick question. When we talk about freight transit, one of the phenomena of the pandemic and the acceleration of e-commerce is that there are a lot of deliveries in our denser residential areas. There are a lot more of those deliveries than in other areas. And what about cargo bikes? What about really very different types of delivery vehicles in the urban parts of the very urban parts of Louisiana? That's not going to be for every place, but it could be in places that actually have a very high rate of e-commerce. And that might be something else you'd want to look at. What do those numbers look like in Louisiana? What are the trends?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Harriet. Dr. Gopu.
Yes, I want to just comment on one thing. I mean, this is down the road, and that is the emphasis on Hyperloop. I think most of you all might have read about that. That is the upcoming technology, and it's something that maybe it should be looked at very seriously in the transportation sector. Dubai is laying the first, I think, the Hyperloop line from Dubai to Abu Dhabi, and that's I mean, you're moving goods at the speed of about 700 miles an hour and get them off the highway system. And I think that's something which is going to happen because there's a tremendous amount of money that is going into that. And that's, all the states, it's just not Louisiana, all the states needs to be looking at that seriously. And I don't see a room in this one, but I think that's futuristic. It's not really futuristic. It's going to be happening fairly soon, within the next few years.
Yeah, so would that, even though it's in the future, would that be inside of freight?
I think it's inside of freight because
Yeah.
the objective, I think the emphasis of Hyperloop is to get the 18-wheelers off the road. And also the containers. For shipping containers, you could have a Hyperloop out in the ocean, and basically ships will unload and shoot this through the Hyperloop. So you won't need the major ports that the way we see it.
Yeah.
Los Angeles airport would be a dinosaur if this Hyperloop really takes off. And so there's something which is maybe 10 years down the road or something like that, but it's going to happen. And the French railways have invested a lot of money because they see there is a potential in this one.
That makes sense, Dr. Gopu. Thank you for that. I think
I do not know how this one fits in the strategy, but that's something which people need to think about.
Maybe it goes under improving freight efficiency. I think there's something really interesting about what you're saying there. All right, we have done pretty decent on time. I know, Lindsay, we took a little longer than we probably were supposed to.
Could I bring up one thing, close out before we go?
Absolutely.
Does anybody have any comments on sequestration? We had sent out some ideas about reforestation of public properties and adjudicated properties and things. And anybody have any comments on that? One thing that does, particularly in urban areas, it helps reduce what's called the heat island effect, which drives up everybody's electric bills, particularly in the summer, because you have to run the air conditioner more. Whereas if you have more tree cover in the urban areas, it tends to reduce the temperatures and such. But does anybody have any comments on any of that as far as a strategy?
I see Vivian. Oh, you're on mute, Vivian. You're still on mute. Oh, there you go.
Sorry, it's raising hands, unmuting, muting. It gets confusing. Thank you, Eric, for bringing that up. I want to say one thing about that because I totally believe in it. There's just a couple of caveats. When we look at reforestation, because I work in air quality, we want to make sure that while we are curing one problem, we're not exacerbating another. When we look at reforestation, we need to look at indigenous trees and the slower growing trees. We don't want trees that are not indigenous to our area, and we do not want the faster growing trees such as the Bradford pears that everybody loves to put in their yard because they're so pretty in the spring. The Bradford pears actually emit mega isoprenes, which are a VOC and hamper our ability to control ozone because it's a natural source versus a facility or an industrial source. When Atlanta reforested for the Olympics, they put in a bunch of quick growing flowering trees because they wanted everything to be pretty for the Olympics, and they shot themselves in the foot with ozone
Okay, I'll do that.
concentration building due to the isoprene emissions. So we need to work with the air quality people at DEQ when we start looking at the carbon sinks, the natural carbon sinks for sequestration.
Yeah.
Okay, and we had asked the scientific group to give us different species of trees and what their carbon uptake was. So when we get that, we're more than happy to get with you and we can look that over and make sure we're not creating one problem by solving another problem.
Know that it's not only trees that use carbon dioxide, all plants use carbon dioxide, so you don't have to look at just trees.
Yeah, wetlands restoration, I think, is important for that as well. So,
yeah.
Correct.
Eric, we have an ag forestry conservation team, another committee. And if you're interested, I can put you in touch with the group that's working on the conservation and on the forestry side.
Yeah, and Lindsay, remind me, I've gone through the action template a dozen times, but it's a fairly dense and complex thing. Is there a space in there to actually answer Eric's question too, as folks are going through, as we're going through putting those actions through the process of being able to check in on what the what the other implications could be.
Which question specifically?
But the point about unintended consequences, rather, you know, it's.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. There's a question on there about negative consequences from implementing these.
That's what I thought. I couldn't remember. So it's a good way to get feedback from folks about what those things might be. Kent, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, just something in terms of the sequestration, and that would fit in really well with some of the land use policies and street development, complete street type things. Putting in some requirements that you do put in, you know, doing a complete streets or a beautification project along with a transportation project, that you make sure that you put in the correct types of trees and the correct type of landscape along with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Harriet, did you have your hand up for this or something before? No, you're good. Okay, great. Anne.
I just wanted to agree with that last statement about the complete streets. That kind of all starts falling under the infrastructure that's going to support our transportation changes, because you know, having streets that are safe for people to ride a bicycle so they can not drive their car and so forth. So that's definitely one of those cross-cutting sectors we're going to need to look at, or kind of the overlap with the other groups.
Yeah, that's great. And we've already heard from the land use committee that they have a lot of interest. And so I think there's going to be a way for us to connect really specifically and cross-reference strategies and actions. Good deal. Eric, are we good on this front, do you think? Can we move on, or is there anything else you think we need to do on this front?
I think we're good. You know, if we're going to take a break, we probably may want to do that now for 10 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Y'all think it's the right time's right?
That makes sense. Is that good, Lindsay?
Yeah, members, how about we come back together? What do you think, by 3?
I think 3 o'clock. We'll be stingy and say 8 minutes.
Okay, we'll just have to cut our action discussion short, but I thought that was a wonderful discussion.
Yeah, really good, and also just some great thoughts in the chat too, so we can make sure to capture those. All right, folks, we'll come back at 3 o'clock sharp and get this thing started back. Thank you, everyone. All right, let's see here. Looks like most folk are back. Eric, if it's okay with you, I think maybe we get started.
It's 3 o'clock, so if they're not back, they didn't meet the deadline. So
301. 301. Oh, Lindsay, you're back in charge.
Okay, great. So members, next we're entering into our working session on actions. I know it says that we have 80 minutes there, which we don't have left today, but that was a great strategy discussion. And now we're moving more into the specifics of brainstorming a thorough list of potential actions. So we want to think about those strategies and then try and consider, how do we fulfill that strategy? How do we actually make that happen? There will be a lot of different ways to do that for each strategy that we've identified. And knowing that we probably only have about 40 minutes for this discussion, we'll kind of have to move quickly through identifying these, knowing that once the chairs and I discuss the spreadsheet and send that out, you guys can continue adding to and developing actions. Today's really just an exercise to get us started on that. So it's okay if we don't reach every single strategy and talk about every single action. We'll have an opportunity for you guys to do that through the coming month and a half.
Okay.
But we do want to be able to assign homework for everyone. So we do encourage everyone to talk in this discussion and begin to identify and support roles on this proposal development. And just a reminder that action is the specific policy, program, or project to be directly implemented. So that's our focus here. And same ground rules, focus on brainstorming. Even if we might not be proposing the most feasible items, we want to get all the ideas out there. This is really the opportunity to discuss everything. And with that, thinking about approaches that work for Louisiana with it. And sharing the force so that we can hear from everyone. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and Colleen is going to share hers and take some live notes as we go back through the strategies and identify actions.
All right, sounds excellent. Thank you for that. And, Lindsay, just by way of clarity, not only are we asking people, the committee, to set forth actions for each of these strategies, but will we assign folk to follow up on those actions in this meeting, or will that happen later?
So once we identify those actions, the homework of assigning it to them is basically filling it out in the template and submitting it by that April 30th deadline. Okay. There's no need to follow up on that for this meeting. But just making sure we don't duplicate efforts or have very big gaps. We want to have those times.
All right, sounds excellent. All right, good people. I know some of the discussion we had in the strategies context, some of those felt like actions. And so I felt like some folks were reserving their thoughts until we got to this part. So we'll do as we did before and go through this from the top. Support use of local and regional public transit, both inter and intra-city. And I see Alex has his hand up first. Alex?
So, and Fozell, you or De Niro might be able to add on to this in more detail than I can, but it seems like the logical first step from the state process is the fact that the state, in my opinion, woefully underinvests in public transit right now, and to be able to do the kind of put ourselves in position to get the kind of behavior shifts that we're talking about that would lead to significant mode shift and increased use of transit to have the effects that we want. There needs to be a lot more investment.
Alex, are you thinking about the tiers of advantage from a climate perspective by having more investment, right? My understanding is it's, if you do nothing else, people using more public transit is better than personal vehicle use. And then of course, public transit using alternative fuels is better than regular fuel. And then of course, electrification is, I won't say better, but different, a different opportunity. And so I just want to make sure that the increase in investment is directed at maximizing the emissions impact.
Yes, for my intent is specifically around ridership and increasing usefulness of transit to those who are already taking transit. And I'd go even further is to say direct support for operations, although capital would also be important.
Yeah, that's huge. Thank you for that. Anne? Uh-oh.
Okay. Oh, no, I was kind of formulating a thought, but I was thinking some of this De Niro would probably be able to address better. But when we're incentivizing and funding transit, there's different funding sources that they have. But one of my points is I want to make sure that we're able to, like where Sport Train and CATS are taking advantage of the federal funding and grants to move their vehicles over to either natural gas or electric. Some of these other transit agencies are smaller and they need more help and more assistance. And so we need to be able to do some outreach to them and show them that they can do it too. There's a lot of misconceptions in rural communities that these technologies don't work for them. It's just, you just got to look at it a different way, and they may have different strategies that we can do. So there's going to be some education and handholding needed for some of the other transit agencies.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Kent.
Just to comment on her comment, what we've done a lot here in the Shreveport area is we've actually flexed over a lot of highway funds to De Niro to do that replacement of the buses and to get those new fleets in. Some of that education may be to the smaller urbans to let them know you can flex some of your highway funds to transit to do that. And I know that Eric has helped out with some CMAQ funds, you know, also.
Nice.
So planning commission can be a good part of that, you know, or anyone who has, or DOT, anyone who has access to CMAQ, like you said.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I do want to add to the point I think that Ann made earlier, there are some operational implications there that also should be considered inside of budget support for local and regional agencies beyond the infrastructure, being able to actually support the operational stuff. Jessica.
Thanks, Lozelle. This is something that's going to go across a lot of things, but to address the coordinate transit development with development of housing and job centers, the TOD, I think for that and for, you know, reducing VMTs, for curbing sprawl, you know, all of which will contribute to lowering emissions generated by transportation. We need our planning, we have to put some teeth into our planning incentives. And so I think there's a lot of ideals around those things that are baked into some of our transportation planning processes, but they are easily overridden by other objectives. And so I think we need to reevaluate the way in which we're incentivizing planning that supports these actions and strategies.
Okay. Let's see. And do we know, Jessica, are there other examples that we might be able to, and you don't have to know off the top of your head, but should we also be looking at other examples where this may be done well, so we can get a sense of what that looks like?
Yes, and I can add that to my homework list. It's almost like there's CPEX has looked at so many of those, I don't even know where to start. So, but I'd be happy to come back to the group with some good examples.
Great, and we always like it when people self-select for the homework. So thank you for that. And Ann is also reminding us that the Department of Energy often has funding for planning through the Energy Efficient Mobility Systems Division as well. Thank you for that, Ann. Other thoughts on actions inside of the public transit strategy?
Mr. Daniels, I think a majority of it has already been covered, but the one thing that I would say under funding is possibly revisit the Parish Transportation Fund. That's where the majority of the urbans get the funding for the state of Louisiana. That supports public transit for urban. So looking at the Parish Transportation Fund will be a huge key in allocating funding to urban transit providers throughout the state in order to do some of these things that we really want to do.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Danelle. Any other thoughts here? We still have, oh, Alex Pazorski. Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, piggybacking off of what Danelle said, I've been trying to do some research on this ahead of time, and my understanding is state funding is still rudimentary, so I apologize if I'm getting this wrong, but I mean, I think it's like there's $5 million total period that can go to transit just in the state from that right now. So there's, I think, a lot of room in there for recommendations for how to improve that. I'd also want to put in here some consideration of DOTD policy and state policies for how those can be better suited to prioritize transit, transit HOV lanes, that type of thing, to actually be able to get transit vehicles through traffic and make them a more logical choice on that side as well.
Great. Thanks, Alex. All right. Any other thoughts here? I see Vivian, and then after Vivian, Scott.
I think under the ride sharing for category, there needs to be a bigger education, but marketing of ride share. I know Baton Rouge has tried with Commuter Crew rather unsuccessfully. Get people to ride share. There needs to be a bigger push if we're going to get that out. People don't know it's there because they don't have the wherewithal to get it advertised. You know, I mean, they do it on Facebook, they do it on social media, they do it, but you know, people like it and then they swoop up, but nobody really uses it. And I think with the younger generation being more urban these days, that it might work well for them to have something, you know, have the wherewithal to get the word out, educate. Let's start talking to high schoolers and college.
Yeah.
Put it in orientation. Do something.
Yeah. And there's something.
And sorry about the dog.
And it's okay. There's something really important about that. I know in New Orleans, we're also trying to take similar actions to create a new generation of public transit users as a way of creating some of that behavior change you all were talking about earlier. Scott.
Okay. All right. I guess what I'm going to say is under the alternative fuel use, then this also goes along with the reduction in emissions at airports. One of the things that all airports, especially commercial airports and your larger GA airports, are required to have is an airport master plan. It's basically a 20-year plan of what your airport and where you're heading in for the next 20 years, and also all of your capital improvement projects. To me, that would be a excellent way to look at this. Now, usually the FAA mandates this, but the DOTD Office of Aviation is intimately involved with each airport in the state of Louisiana. And we actually have, and I'm not biased, probably the best state office of aviation in the country. They're just absolutely incredible with what they do. But I feel that we could probably use them in looking in some of the alternative biofuels for aviation. For instance, right now we're in the middle of redoing our master plan, and each airport does it every 5 years, and we're in the middle of doing ours. And one of the things we're looking at is an alternative fuel farm for biofuels. Now we still have a lot to look into that. We don't know if aircraft comes in and we can offer biofuel for the aircraft, and they go to an airport that does not. Can you utilize regular fuel? We haven't gotten that deep yet, but we do know that's the direction it's going. So, you know, we can encourage the airports to, and it's something relatively easy to do, to encourage them to look into that into the future as far as alternative fuels go. And so, and then along with that is all their support equipment that is utilized at an airport. There's a tremendous amount of support equipment. Of course, you can do electric. That's not a, an issue, or a biofuel, either one, they're both available. So as part of airport master plans, that would be a really good section that we could put as part of the master plans, is to look at that, trying to lower emissions and get to where we need to be. It's our, call it carbon neutral section, and look at those things at airports, what airports can do. And in the same sense, now we're going to drop down to the reduce, the emissions. Look at the same thing as far as land uses. Is there areas that cannot be used for anything other than possibly solar? And that's what also we're in our master plan. We're doing that as we speak, looking at about 250 acres to utilize as a solar field. And then, and of course, our airport is 100% LED. That's something that I know the state aviation is working right now with all the airports trying to get to that point. But anyway, getting all the airports to be completely LED on their airfields. So that's just a couple of areas that we could look at. But I do believe airport master planning would be the point to where we should start as the aviation community looking at these things.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Thanks, Scott. Ann, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, quickly. I can't believe we didn't think of this, but off-road vehicles, Scott made me think of this with the terminal tractors. There's a lot of electric terminal tractors, but then there's forklifts, and there's all sorts of other vehicles that are off-road that can be alternative fuels as well. They can be, propane forklifts. There can be electric forklifts. So that might be a little kind of subheading, off-road equipment that can kind of cross over into ag.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. Let's see here. All right. Anything else in public transit actions?
I would add one thing. Under encouraging alternative fuel use, I think we got to look at training, a statewide training program or something. Because I've had two agencies, I know that's public transit, that went to alternative fuels, and that's now reverting back to non-alternative fuels due to the fact that their technicians didn't have the proper training to manage the vehicles as they came online. So we definitely got to have some kind of training or budget to support training part of this process.
That's an excellent point. Thank you, De Niro. I didn't know that. It also goes to this idea of supporting the different kinds of infrastructure, and certainly folks knowing how to maintain those vehicles and other things is critical.
Yeah, that's something that's been an issue, for a long time with fleets of every kind, not just transit, is getting trained technicians. There's a technician shortage, period. But when you add on top of that specialty knowledge, for natural gas or for electric, we do need to invest in the community college system and make sure that we are putting out trained technicians. 100%.
Yeah.
Agree.
And it seems to me this is also a great cross-sector opportunity with the committee that's looking at economic development and jobs and training, so that we can begin to strategize around that. Other thoughts on the strategies in public transit before we move on? Okay, great. All right, I see you, Alex. Did you want to jump?
Close out? Yeah, I just wanted to highlight Harriet's point that she just put in the chat that I think is a good one. That's Harriet, if you wouldn't mind maybe verbally expanding on that a little bit before we move on.
Is it the last point about DOTD or okay. Harriet, are you able to come on, or are you having to type in the chat because you can't be on screen? Maybe she's in a place where she can't talk.
Okay, well, we've got it on the notes, so we can revisit it in the future discussions.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll just read it out loud if that's okay, just because there's some folk who can't see the chat. Harriet says one way to get DOTD and other state policies to encourage transit, biking, et cetera, is a focus on access as a metric for the performance of the state transportation system. A focus on access for performance shifts the emphasis of the transportation system away from speed and congestion and toward ensuring that every Louisiana resident has great access to the things they need on a daily basis: jobs, healthcare, education, retail, services, and the like. This would help bring broadband squarely in the realm of DOTD as well, which goes to the other point that Eric and others were making. Okay, thank you, Alex, for lifting that up. We'll put that in. All right. Passenger and LDV emission reduction. There are a set of strategies here. Some of you have put some other information in here. Are there any particular actions that you want to add under any of these strategies? I have a question that maybe one of you can help answer. The strategy under electrification and charging infrastructure to support electric vehicles and cross-sector with power, is there a pre-existing analysis of the opportunity to invest in that kind of infrastructure, or do we need an analysis to actually inform this strategy?
This is Anne. We're working very closely with Entergy on infrastructure planning, with the Department of Environmental Quality, with the Volkswagen settlement, and our DC fast charging master plan. So there's lots of different efforts, but having a statewide analysis or plan for how to support the amount of vehicles that are going to be coming and the amount of vehicles that we need to have that need to go electric is something that we would very much like to work with on the state, and we could potentially even get one of the national labs to help us out as well. But you know, that's something that we've been pushing for quite some time, and Vivian can you know, tell y'all about what we did for the Department of Environmental Quality to help them with Volkswagen settlement. We're going to have a lot more charging coming in the future once some of these applications, you know, that came for Volkswagen settlement are finally approved and the contracts are signed and we start putting them, you know, conduit in the ground. But having that, we can't just leave it up to the public sector to build it out. We need to have a strategy, and we do need to have a plan so that it supports all communities and not just the ones that have the best business case.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for that, because in a few other comments, folks mentioned the importance of the private sector, universities, and other places where there's some at-scale opportunities. Let's see, Harriet, did you want to get in here?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I was having some technical difficulties. So there's, I think, it's good news that you're at the beginning of electrification, because there are a lot of equity issues about how it happens and who it serves. It might be nice to try to understand in Louisiana who are the high mileage drivers. They should become the priority for electric vehicles and any subsidies, including infrastructure. But if California is any indication, they've electrified before the rest of the US, and 90% of their infrastructure is on private property associated with private off-street parking. So if you live in, if you can't afford to, if you don't live in a place where you have off-street parking, if you can't afford to provide your own infrastructure, then you can't access very easily the inexpensive overnight charging, which can typically be done even with a regular plug, not any special high speed. So that, and the fact that many low and moderate income households don't buy new vehicles. And all of our incentives have focused in the US for the most part on tax incentives for new vehicle purchases. So I think you need to give some special attention to used vehicles and to where the infrastructure goes to support lower income households who might be doing a ton of driving. Anyone who's driving for Uber or Lyft, you know, is not a wealthy person typically, and many others that drive for a living, you know, might be a priority for electrification, but it's going to take some special attention to make that happen.
Great, thanks, Harriet. And I think we have some work to do to begin to set forth the framework for the equity analysis and what we're actually measuring to let us know we're actually meeting the standard.
Hey, Flozell, could I comment on that too? I'm glad you brought that up, Harriet. People need to understand there's a large part of our population that is trapped in the used vehicle market.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's easy to talk about everybody needs to switch to this or that, but,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how are poor people supposed to do that? So it's going to take a while before there's used electric vehicles even on the market for them to even buy. So they're trapped in the gasoline powered vehicle market for probably at least the next 10 years. So, you know, if we can perhaps make biofuels available at an affordable price or even a lower price than gasoline, that and it can be used in their vehicle without any mechanical modifications to it, that's a way to help people participate in lowering greenhouse gas emissions without actually going out and trying to purchase a new vehicle. And the electric vehicles, at least that I've seen, are not very cheap. So they're not inexpensive. So, you know, we've got a lot of people like that in Louisiana. We need to keep them in mind. So thank you for bringing that up, Harriet.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And as usual, Anne is reminding us that Louisiana Clean Fuels is working with DOE and others on some of these issues and have some other recommendations there. Other strategies inside of passenger and LDV emission reduction for which we want to offer actions. Okay. Harriet?
Yeah, one more thing to offer that it might be appropriate to say, we can talk about the feasibility, et cetera, that efficiency might be more important, you know, might be a higher priority than electrification. So that includes switching trips, right, to other modes like transit, right? Like for the reasons that Eric said and other reasons, the transition to all electric is going to take a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, even if everybody was in an electric vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we still have a whole bunch of trips being taken very inefficiently, you know, and a 2,000 pound conveyance for one person when those trips could be taken walk, bike, or transit. So having that infrastructure, having those other things. So I don't know if at some point you're going to create this hierarchy
Mm-hmm.
about the order in which you do things, but that's something to think about.
Yeah. And I don't think we're there yet, but let me ask the committee members, do you feel that we have enough information to be able to weigh the difference or the benefits, if you will, of prioritizing efficiency, for instance, over other forms of emissions reduction? Vivian, did you want to?
I do. I think that it is a bit much to believe that every vehicle is going to turn into an electric vehicle. I think that I'm a scientist by background, and so that just absolutely blows my mind because you don't have a balance. If every vehicle is electric, you don't have a balance. I think we need to make sure that we don't leave out the other types of fuels, or just going back to Carter-esque driving rules where you don't go 80 miles an hour down the highway. You know, you drive effectively in your vehicles so that they're not making extra CO2. I don't think that we need to do away with gasoline diesel vehicles. I think that will serve a purpose for the next 50 to 100 years as the world continues to evolve. I think you are also in your EVs leaving out those of us who drive 50 miles to and from our office every day because we choose to live in rural areas and not urban areas. Yeah. So we can't leave a big part of the state out of this discussion.
Yeah, I agree with
I think we need to look at working on behaviors more than just flipping fleets.
Yeah, and Vivian, I think there's a lot of agreement with what you're saying. We have a strategy for encouraging transition to lower emission vehicles, to your point. Are there any actions that you or others would like to offer in that context to do exactly what you're saying? I think there's a lot of agreement with your point about that. And I don't know if we're ready to offer actions in that context, but if we are, this is a good place, I think, to put that maybe.
Well, I think to that point, let's go back to Carter-esque.
Uh-huh.
I think most of us on this call understand that I'm going back to the late 1970s.
Mhm.
You know, we had an energy crisis. Well, now we have a climate crisis. So we need to look at it from the whole, not just with blinders on. You know, there were lots of things that were implemented that brought on energy savings. We went to smaller vehicles. Remember, nobody could get a Honda. You were on a waiting list for 6 months to a year for a Honda because we all had land barges, because, you know, we were in the luxury vehicles. I think America has gone back to the luxury vehicles with SUVs. And so it's going to be hard to get all of the, pardon my colloquialism here, but soccer moms out of their SUVs and into smaller vehicles or electric SUVs, because as Mr. Calavoda has said, they're very expensive if you can find them. So, you know, I think we need to look at the behavioral aspects also and encourage people to, if you don't have to buy a great big SUV to drive around in, you can buy a smaller vehicle that emits less, you know, get better gas mileage, whatever, or move into the hybrids. But I think by thinking that the fleets are going to flip that fast, we're fooling ourselves, and we're doing a disservice to the rest of the state.
Yeah.
Especially those of us in the rural areas.
Yeah.
Lozelle, if I could just throw
Derek? Yeah.
word in. Yeah. I think one thing that Vivian is saying is we've all been taught from a young age, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
We did that. We put all our eggs in the oil drum and the bottom's fallen out several times. Let's not put all our eggs in the electric basket either. You know, we need a variety of fuels available for people to use, so we can have a variety of different types of vehicles, and therefore we will be able to withstand any calamity that may happen in society in the future better than if we've got everything in one technology. So I think that was one of the points you were trying to make, Vivian.
Yeah, and I fully agree, and I think I'm seeing lots of agreement in the chat. I think what I'm getting to here is just exactly what's being said. Incentives, subsidies, other things to support the behavior shift, I think is going to be important. Are there any other actions that folk want to recommend? Because it seems the same thing with reducing the VMTs, the vehicle miles traveled, right? What are the things, are there actions there that we should consider to support that strategy, as well as the lower emission vehicles and the use of alternative fuels in that context? Okay. Nope. Sounds good. All right, looks like, Lindsay, we can move to the medium and heavy duty vehicle emission reduction, which we've included off-road vehicles as well here, as mentioned earlier. Any thoughts on actions to support these strategies? Uh-oh, Vivian, you're still on mute. Then we'll go to you, Ann.
I seem to be on a soapbox. I've been giving this a lot of thought, going through all of the information that Lindsay has been so kind to present to us. You know, just let me point to Eric's agency, DOTD. When they fix roads, because DOTD does fix some roads. It's not all on contract.
Mhm.
And you have those dump trucks loaded with the asphalt or the rocks or whatever, and they line up because they're doing a job. You've got the steamroller there. We need to think about those not as electric, but as an alternative fuel. I know that DEQ has worked very closely with DOTD through the Volkswagen settlement to help them restore or get some new lesser emitting vehicles in their fleets, especially for heavy equipment. And this equipment's very expensive. So just knowing what we did for DOTD, we need to look at it on the private sector as well as the public sector, that these fleets are built to last. You know, diesel engines last for hours. They don't last for years, and they last, the years add up. When they're maintained, they run for 30 years.
Yeah.
So we need to look at the financial investment that's being made in these vehicles, how, you know, you can start flipping your fleet to alternative fuels, not necessarily electric, but something that will fit a dump truck, you know, a steamroller, a crane, a backhoe, whatever, that would be better than electric, because you also have to look at where you're going to charge these vehicles if they are electric, and what methodology of electricity you're going to use to charge them, because you can't use solar and wind at night unless you've got battery backup. And I don't see the state investing in a whole bunch of battery backup to start, you know, charging vehicles. I think that was one of the bigger things, and I'm glad that Harriet brought up the medium duty vehicles, because it's going to be the same thing. You know, how we can start to flip those fleets, do it efficiently, make sure that we do it so that we don't exacerbate one problem for the other.
Okay, sounds good. Anne, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm talking a whole lot right now, and I hope I'm not taking up anyone else's air here, but we just have so much experience with this.
Yeah.
For an action, one of the things we're really going to need to understand the needs of the trucking industry. If we're going to want them to change any of their behaviors or adopt any new practices, technologies, or anything, we need to have a listening session where we sit down with the Louisiana Motor Transport Association and their fleets, and we really just listen to them and figure out what their issues are, so we can understand, you know, what can be done now and what their needs are, and what we need to do to support them to get them to make some behavioral changes, if not vehicle changes. And a lot of what we do is really going to have a lot to do with what the vehicle availability is. There just really isn't heavy, medium duty, like highway equipment in electric vehicles right now. So, I mean, it's not even an option to electrify a lot of the, like, say, some of the DOTD equipment. But what can be done with diesel vehicles is we can have tougher emission standards in the state of Louisiana, where these old dump trucks, they're not taking care of them. That's why you see all the black smoke coming out. They're not keeping up with the filters. They're not keeping up with the after treatment. They're not maintaining the vehicles. And so if we get a behavior change within the fleets and force people to keep these vehicles maintained and make them replace them when they get too old, or help have incentives to replace them, a new diesel is way cleaner than an old diesel. And also when you have a super old diesel that's not running well and you put biodiesel in it, I mean, you're helping it some, but you know, a new diesel running on biodiesel, that's even better. So that there are a lot of options out there, but I definitely believe, and also when you think of medium and heavy duty vehicles, there's different ranges. So if it's a short route, that's a fixed route, electric's going to work great. There's options for medium duty that are coming out right now. Medium duty is like your package delivery, your Amazons, your UPS, your FedEx. Those are being driven, they're going towards electric, not because of environmental reasons. They're going to electric because they're demanding that their manufacturers give them an option that reduces downtime and reduces maintenance. And that's why you're seeing this push for electrification so heavy in medium and the heavy duty sector, and for hydrogen fuel cells as well, is because of the economics, less downtime, less need for, mechanics.
Great. Well, and it's also just highly beneficial since medium-sized vehicles have such an enormous contribution to emissions.
Right. And when there's a set route, that's the case when electric works. But there's many other instances where natural gas and propane or hybrids or biofuels work great too.
I think here's an expectation, and you mentioned this in the chat. By the time we get all of these and future recommendations sorted out, we'll have a bit of discipline around offering all the different options and having the projections of what impact they'll have. And we're going to need everything, to your point.
Right.
And so I think it's all going to sort itself out from that perspective. Other thoughts here before we move on to the next section? And let me ask, Lindsay, how are we doing on time? I know we're coming up. After we're done with the actions, what else do we have to do in this meeting?
For just a few minutes about the April cross-sector workshop, and then we'll do public comment.
Okay.
So we can go maybe until 3:50 with discussion. I know we want to talk on the cross-sector strategies.
So let's do a bit of speed round here with regard to the next section, unless there's anything else folks want to offer. Nope. Okay, sounds good. Let's freight transit. We have a handful of strategies here. Are there particular actions that people want to offer in this context?
And members, I would say that Bethany Stish and Chet Chasson would like to focus in this area too, if any of you are interested to partner with them. Bethany had a class this afternoon, and Chet got pulled away, but they're very interested in this area.
Great. Okay. Anne? Oh, that was an old, okay. That was you and Scott need to, Scott, you probably want to take your hand down unless you want me to keep calling on you. Although no, it's okay. But we're in freight transit. If there are any actions for freight transit, including vessel, rail, we talked quite a bit about freight efficiency in this context, which I think also goes in a few other areas.
Lozelle, if nobody else has anything, I'll throw something out. One is the availability of shore power at our public port facilities. That's something that we need to look into helping the public port facilities provide. And then there's also the other fuels that could be made available at public port facilities, for example, tugboats and such that use diesel right now. They might be willing to switch over to biodiesel if they don't have to make any alterations in their engines.
Gotcha.
And same for ocean going vessels, that come foreign flag vessels may come in and they're using diesel engines. And so if you have something that'll run in the diesel engine that doesn't require any modifications to the engine, if we can have that available at the port facilities, then they may be willing to purchase that and to refuel before they leave for their next port of call.
Great, thanks, Eric. That's great. Kent, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I would just say that similar to the comment above in terms of the trucking industry, that maybe need to a similar type thing, listening session with the freight movers, what their real needs are and what their real expectations are down the line too.
Fantastic. Yeah, and also getting a sense of what else they may be doing. I'm finding in some instances you see industry and some of the larger public sector spaces also making some progress that that we may not be widely aware of. Sounds great. Okay. A couple of other areas here include idle reduction in the cross-category context and outreach and education. I'm not sure if folks have actions they want to offer for those or if they, Ann.
Okay, I had a whole bunch of cross-cutting ones. For idle reduction, the truck stop electrification, shore power, VMT reductions kind of all be clumped in to that. We talked about ag and biofuels and off-road, kind of cross-cutting over. And then the workforce development, cross-sector training with training technicians. And working with community colleges and such to make sure we have a trained workforce. I think that was
Great.
kind of those broad cross-cutting categories.
Yeah. And that was the workforce and training in particular around
Mechanics and technicians.
Yeah, mechanics, right. Okay, great.
It's a big, big issue. Like I said, even for diesel.
Yeah. Okay.
And first responder training. The more alternative fuel vehicles we have on the road, they need to know what to do. They need to know how to cut us out of a natural gas or an electric vehicle if we're in an incident. They need to understand extrication. Those classes are expensive. And, we get out as much as we can to teach firefighters and such about how to respond to incidents. Trash trucks catch on fire all the time, and it has nothing to do with the natural gas systems and their trucks.
Right.
But they react differently when there is a hot load, and firefighters need to know what to do with that. So that's one of the considerations. We need the whole supply chain educated, or don't want any weak links.
Yeah, that's great. Something else I'm wondering about outreach and education in the other direction. It seems like there is a significant amount of federal policy and regulatory change on the forefront. And I'm wondering, Ann and Vivian and others, how you're thinking about, how do we keep up with what will be shifting in the next 18 months so that we can get in front of those changes? So that we're educating ourselves, in other words, on those things as we think about these recommendations.
Well, yeah, we keep up with that in general because we're a federal program. Louisiana Clean Fuels is a Department of Energy program, even though we're independent, but so we're kind of quasi. And so we keep up with a lot of that, and we share that with our stakeholders. And we have transportation energy partners and some of the other groups like that are really good at keeping up with federal legislation.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be important because we've had a lot of folks ask about not only the inventory, but other ways of forecasting what's coming that we should be taking into account as we think about these recommendations. Vivian?
As Ann said, she keeps up with it through DOE, EPA. I work for DEQ, so therefore our federal partner is EPA. EPA issues different climate documents regularly. So we keep up with it through their website. I do want to say that Gina McCarthy has been appointed under Senator Kerry to work in his new climate office. Gina is she's a go-getter. She was the head of EPA under the Obama administration. She talks straight from the hip, and she will work toward this end because she was trying to work toward this end when she was the head of EPA. I think you're going to have to get on some sort of list to get all of these documents. I get the Federal Register every morning, and you can just go through the table of contents and do that, or get on some sort of feed from either our congressional delegation. It's not a one size fits all, Flozell, and it's very frustrating because it's one of the reasons why I've been in air quality for 28 years is because the rules change every day. And so my job is never boring. I think that things are going to start to move quickly with this administration. So maybe we could start a resource with Lindsay, some sort of library of resources that we can use to keep up with these rules.
Yeah.
Lindsay, I didn't mean to give you homework. I'm sorry.
Other thoughts here on these cross categories, other cross categories, and Lindsay, are we going to go into the cross-cutting strategies as well? Or do you want to preserve the last bit of time to make assignments? Oh, Harry, did you want to jump in here?
Yes, if I can. I would just say maybe make resilience a cross-cutting strategy. Not only is it a big budget item for you guys, and there's more money coming on the preparedness side.
Yeah.
And they've been using past damage as a way to allocate the money.
Yeah.
And in all the agencies that Vivian just mentioned, there are climate people appointed, people that Vicky Arroyo at EPA, Kevin Bush at HUD, who are going to be very sympathetic to this expenditure of money that both mitigates climate change but adapts to the changes that are happening. And so I think that is worth pursuing as its own strategy. There's more money in that space, in that recovery space, than anything else in the federal budget. Any one thing, it dwarfs the other sources of funding.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, and I know there's going to be a big push, Harriet, to finally look at both some of the long-term planning in the context of disaster, and that's going to have huge implications for states like Louisiana if any of those updates can be made. We've been pushing and trying to do some of that stuff, as you know, for the last 15 years, so certainly the last 12 years, but it seems like there's an appetite for it now. All right. Any other thoughts on this front before we switch to give ourselves some homework?
Lizelle, when we're looking at these cross-cutting strategies, possibly we can put 1 or 2 or 3 people on the group of strategies to dive into actions within them. So we don't have to dive into these yet. We can go back to the top.
Okay, great. Guys, I have to step for a second. I'll be right back.
Okay, everyone, let's start from the top at public transit. And as we start looking back through these actions, if you could identify actions you would be interested to lead, I'm envisioning we can put 1 or 2 or 3 people on an action to coordinate on and develop. So let's just start at the top on increasing state investment in transit to increase transit ridership. I believe this was put forward by Alex, but I don't want to put you on the spot to lead it.
I'll work on that.
Okay, great. Our next one is helping local communities to take advantage of federal funds to transition public fleets to lower emission fuels.
All right.
I'll take that one. It doesn't matter.
Could I just ask for clarification? And I'm sorry if I missed this. When we say we're working on something, what and when are we committing ourselves to?
So this is committing to developing this action and the action template for submitting in that April 30th deadline.
Okay, so completing the action template for whatever action we're working on by April 30th. Okay.
And we entirely understand these actions might take different shapes as you guys begin to develop them, and that's quite all right.
So I don't think I should be the lead on anything, but I'd be happy to help on this one, since I know a lot of the federal funding programs, not just at DOT.
That'll be great, Harry. De Niro or Alex, would this be a place of your expertise?
I'll do anything on the public transit that you need my help on.
I'm happy to help on that one. I have less direct knowledge as far as the transition available funding, but happy to do research if you need just the assistance.
If I could make a comment, in the information we sent out to you, we had a proposal to change all of the public fleet over to alternative fuels, transit vehicles included. But it would also be state-owned vehicles, parish-owned vehicles, city-owned vehicles, etc. I mean, we can keep that and just have that as an overall strategy rather than trying to break it up into, you know, we're going to do just for transit and then we're going to do something else for everything else.
You're saying, Eric, inside of this one, you've developed a broader.
Yeah, and I've actually filled out that template already for the whole thing, but which I'll be
So
happy.
public vehicles at the state and local level convert to alternative fuels.
Yeah, it would not include federal vehicles. They'll have to convert their own stuff, but there's, according to.
But so one of the,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that one of the things I've been having some conversations in Washington about is whether or not it would help, since the President Biden's executive order on that conversion, in his case, I think they said electric, but anyway, zero emission vehicles.
Yeah.
Might their collective buying power, might you be able to access schedules that would be negotiated by the federal government that could get you better prices on some of those conversions? That might be one aspect to pursue or to recommend or to ask for.
Yeah,
You mean like group buying programs?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
you want to buy in bulk if you can, but you know, not all of our vehicles would switch over to electric. De Niro has not had good success with electric buses. So, you know, but I mean, even if you did all electric buses, there's still other publicly owned vehicles. As somebody mentioned, we have dump trucks and all kinds of other flatbed trucks, and so do some of the other agencies. So our idea was to switch to a variety of fuels and use that as a demonstration project for the private sector, so we can show over time what the maintenance problems are that you might run into and that kind of thing. And then of course there's a technician training that you run into for mechanics and such. And but that was kind of where we were thinking of going, if that's.
But maybe say collective buying with other states. Maybe you're not the only one who feels that way. And the larger your purchase, maybe the more negotiating room you would have. So
you would have that.
Yeah, there's groups like Sourcewell that that's what they do, is alternative fuel group buying. I would like to work with Eric on that for the state fleets. We've hosted events for the state fleets to teach them about procurement and working with them on procurement and the state bid list. So I definitely want to work with him on that. And the GSA, Leroy Taylor is the person in charge of purchasing vehicles for federal fleets for our territory. He has a very large territory. His office is right off of Essen. And so we could probably potentially pull him into some of those conversations if y'all wanted to know a little bit about what he's doing. But he's most interested in the infrastructure for electric vehicles being put in as soon as possible, so he can buy more electric vehicles as per his requirements for his job.
Yeah,
so that's where they're being pushed.
Just so De Niro and others know, we're not proposing to make decisions on what vehicles you buy. It's really that we're just trying to create an overall program where we can convert. And then even if you have alternative vehicles, if you can get more fuel efficient alternative fuel vehicles, conservation's got to be a big part of what we do as well. So that's what we're trying to do, primarily to set up a program to do that and arrange the funding for it and such. But there's, just so everybody knows, according to DMV, Office of Motor Vehicles, there's 88,000 publicly owned vehicles in Louisiana. Some of those are federal, probably thousands of them belong to the Postal Service, and we wouldn't be fooling with those. But there's probably 75,000 of them that are owned by the state and local governments.
Wow. All right. Time is short, and so I know we want to make sure we get these assignments in. Can we go through and look at the rest of these actions and ask committee members if they're willing to either sign up for them? What are you willing to sign up for, or to at least be a supporter in?
I can help, though I'd prefer to work with someone as far as DOTD and state policies for prioritizing transit.
I'll work with him on that.
I can support that also.
Fantastic. That's Gennaro, Alex, and Kent. Thank y'all so much.
If you need any help on the access measure, I can also be supportive on that.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Harriet.
Under encourage alternative fuel use, I would definitely like to help lead that.
Okay, this is Scott Gamble. I'll be glad to do that too, as far as the alternative and biofuels go, as far as aviation goes, as far as airports. I can do that.
Yeah, I have no expertise with airports and aviation, so.
I have that. Then while I'm still on here, I will also be glad to do the one as far as land use at airports and for solar. And as we discussed earlier, I'll do that one also.
Fantastic.
I can work with him on that.
All right, that's Scott and Kent. Thank you both. That's great.
And also the coordinated planning and transit. All that up above.
Yeah.
You can put Gennaro on encourage alternative fuel use too, since he has experience with 2 of them.
Lizelle, I was having a hard time seeing this. I would certainly like to be part of the planning for transit and housing.
Fantastic. So we'll add Jessica with Kent. On that front. All right. Passenger and LDV emission reduction actions.
Hold on. I'm going to say something about that, but I'm typing. Okay.
Well, I know, Anne, you mentioned the statewide analysis piece and how important that was. I know you don't want to overcommit, though.
Well, this is my job. This is my job 24/7 anyway. So that's fine. Statewide analysis for sure. And the encourage support to transition to electric vehicles. You know, we want a grant to do that. I mean, I'm going to be working on that heavily for 3 years anyway. We have a whole Drive Electric Louisiana program that we're starting. We're going to be hiring new people.
Great. Fantastic.
And anything with infrastructure and infrastructure planning. Yeah, that's, you got me in there.
Good deal. Okay.
And everything we're doing has an equity kind of like umbrella as well to try to make sure that we're being equitable about where it goes.
Fantastic.
And Dr. Gokul, I remember you had mentioned a few ideas under this category of light duty vehicles in the strategy discussion. Did you have any thoughts or want to work on actions within this group?
I can work with someone in that area.
We're going to be doing ride and drive and demonstration events for the next 3 years as well. That's getting the cars and get butts in seats, getting people to test them out and drive them. So that kind of normalizes it. So I can help too.
And is that on the behavioral shifts? Encouraging transition?
I couldn't hear.
That's on encouraging transition.
Yes. Yeah. Kind of behavioral shift. You know, ride and drives are a great way to do that. Demonstration events.
And Colleen, can you put V on there as well?
I'm going to have to hop off. Can I jump in and volunteer to take the reduced VMTs?
Jessica, would you be interested in the land use cross sector?
Yes.
Okay, great. I figured with planning you'd be interested in that one.
Yeah, but I would also love to have some other perspectives on that, because I'm sure Camille's going to be doing that from the other side, and that's a lot of CPEC. So we'll welcome others who are interested.
Jessica, I'm
I'll do
happy to
that.
help with that.
Great. Thank
I
you.
will too.
But if you can coordinate sort of any conversations or anything, that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure.
And it sound-
Anything you need where it crosses over into fueling infrastructure, you can call on me for that.
Thank
And
you.
multi-unit dwellings, charging and workplace charging.
Members, since we're over by 5 minutes now, let's just take these last two headers, the medium and heavy duty and then freight. Is there anyone who wants to work on the actions within this first header of medium and heavy duty vehicle emission reduction? And then you all can coordinate on the actions within.
You can put me down for that, Lindsay. This is Vivian Johnson.
Okay, thanks, Vivian.
And when it goes into converting over to different types of vehicles or different practices, put me down too. 'Cause
Great, great. We'll put
my
Bethany
job
on there.
anyway is working with fleets. So
And Colleen, we'll put Bethany on there on that one. And then on our last category of freight transit, anyone interested to work on developing actions within these?
You can put me on that too. That interests me.
Okay, great.
Me too. This is Vijay Gopu.
And we'll put Chet on that one as well. We'll give people homework even though they're not here.
oh, wait a minute. Joe, who's not here, everything that you have me on that has to do with alternative fuels, put him on it too. Because Joe would be a great partner for that. For medium and heavy duty, for passenger vehicles, for transit, if it has to do with switching to alternative fuel vehicles, add Joe.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to put him down on that too. And for freight transit, I noticed that Wiley had to leave early. We'll also put him on freight transit. He's our board. Okay, I think, Colleen, do we have a good list together? I think we have a good list together, at least to kick us off. And I'll check in with our chairs early next week and we'll get this out to you guys to start working on this. I'll give you the raw notes in this form and then also kind of in an organized spreadsheet form.
Lindsay, this is Vivian Johnson on the cross-cutting categories down at the bottom.
Yes.
Are we going to take those topics as homework also?
Yes, so these are categories where other groups are also working. So I'd love to put maybe 1 or 2 people on power and then ag and forestry.
I would like power.
Okay, great. We'll put you on power. And Eric, I know you're interested in the sequestration and biofuels.
Yes.
Perfect.
Can you put me on that one also?
Sure.
I'll work on power with Vivian.
I just want to make sure we get credit for the transportation side for our reforestation efforts.
That's right.
As far as biofuels, there's also renewable natural gas. That's something that we need to consider is to expand our production of that. That's landfills, wastewater, and dairies. So it's I can't believe I didn't think of that, but that's huge. I know, Dr. Brown's a big fan of that as well from DEQ. And I'd be happy to help with that. Because we were thinking of having an educational program to start teaching landfills how to replicate what St. Landry Parish is doing. And we've been kind of slowly working on a curriculum to start educating people and helping with that.
I think this would be a good avenue for that, Anne.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a wonderful working session with you all. And I feel like we've developed a lot of great strategies and actions too within this. And of course, please continue to develop further actions and think of other areas that we might have missed. We'll have plenty of time to go back and identify some gaps as we move forward. But just to touch on where we're going, moving from here, so you all will have your homework to work on these assigned actions and developing any others that you see necessary. But where we'll come back together again is in that April all hands cross sector workshop. So in here, we're trying to toss up some different groups together, design a few different working sessions, probably about 6 different working sessions, organized around different themes and groups of specific direct actions. So to the extent that you all can identify actions or themes that it would be most helpful to have a deeper focus on with other groups, that would be really helpful. And you can just send me an email with any ideas you have around those actions or themes. I know we had a lot of great discussion around the ag and forestry angle. Land use is a great crossover in power as well with this group. But any other actions you can identify, please just let me know on that. That's where we're moving next in probably like about a month in those 6 different workshops that we'll have. So each of you will be appointed to one group. All of the transportation people might be on one group, or you might be split between a few different groups since you guys have a lot of overlaps. So I'll let you know as we move towards that. And then the committee comes back together all again in May. And in the meantime, just a reminder, the homework is to submit those action proposals by April 30th. And if you do have further questions on the action process or the template or any components of that, please don't hesitate to ask me and I can guide you all through that.
And to confirm with the action templates, we're not bringing them back to this group for submission?
Not back to the group as a whole until submission.
Okay.
And then we'll come back together in May and start to review all of the proposals, identify gaps, identify common alternatives. Well, with that, I think that closes out our content for today, everyone. Eric, I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay. I guess Flozell had to check out on us early, but I don't see him on the screen anymore. So anyway, with that, I'd like to thank everybody for your participation and thanks for hanging in there. It was a very long meeting today and we realized that, but we had a good discussion and hopefully everybody had an opportunity to say what they wanted to say and appreciate your participation. And that questionnaire, the template, it's kind of intimidating, but just do the best you can. I've been through it before. I filled it out for several items. So it can be intimidating, but you need to try to struggle through it best you can and answer the questions as best you can. So anyway, all right. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, Eric, we do have public comment.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, we do.
No, not a problem at all. So we have a few comments from Michael Tritica that I'm seeing on our email, but I also see he's on our attendee list. So Michael, I'm going to promote you to talk in the event that you would rather verbalize your comments instead of me reading them.
You're on mute, Michael.
Michael, I saw you came off of mute. Are you able to speak? We're interested too. If not, I can read your comments.
He may be having microphone trouble, so maybe you ought to go ahead and read his comments.
I'll read his comments then, Michael. And if at any point you're able to speak, then just cut me off, please. Okay, Michael Tritico of Restore has left us a few comments related to the Transportation Committee, and his comment reads, a major source of greenhouse gas emissions in Southwest Louisiana is the steep and dangerous Interstate 10 bridge over the Calcasieu River at Lake Charles. For all its decades, it has caused wastes of fuel and excessive emissions beyond what would occur were there a flat bypass north of the bottleneck that is Lake Charles Sulphur Corridor. Next Thursday, there's going to be a Zoom public meeting on the issue of breaking the impasse and replacing the bridge. The link with information about that meeting is I-10 Lake Charles, and he provides a hyperlink that I can provide to you all. Another comment that he makes is there's a great need for us to return to the utilization of trains for moving people from one place to another. The rail link from Louisiana to the east, destroyed by Hurricane Katrina, needs to be fully activated to Florida's east coast. The link between Lake Charles, Fort Polk, and Shreveport needs to be reactivated. Links from all around the state to the capital should be constructed. As long as a brand new passenger dedicated rail infrastructure is being implemented, it would make good sense to have a bullet train or magnetic levitation train between Atlanta and San Antonio, bisecting Louisiana with conventional rails first to Monroe, Shreveport, Alexandria, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Lafayette, and Lake Charles. And then Michael gave us a final comment that reads, an incredible inefficiency in air service to and from Lake Charles results in untold hundreds of thousands of extra miles of jet traffic annually, with the consequent emissions of greenhouse gases and waste of fossil fuels. There is no air traffic north or east of Lake Charles. People have to fly to Dallas or Houston to get a plane to New Orleans or Atlanta. Similarly, people coming from Miami have to fly over Lake Charles, wait around in Houston, and then fly back east to get to Lake Charles. It's an absurd situation with ongoing consequences for people's personal situations, as well as being a major solvable climate damaging problem. Those are great comments. Michael, thank you for that.
Just so you know, Michael sent a chat saying he did not have a microphone or a camera on the computer he was using, so.
Okay, that's quite all right. I hope I did your comments justice. And that is all of the public comments that we have received today, members. And Michael, I would just remind you that members of the public are encouraged to also put forth their proposals, but I appreciate you giving that to the whole committee.
Okay, does anybody have any closing comments they'd like to provide, or do we have a motion to adjourn? Vivian moves to adjourn. Kent seconds. All in favor, wave. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.